What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of Top 10 Most Insane Video Game Characters. Alright, for those that are wondering where part 1 is, it's up on my channel right now, so if you want to see numbers 10 through 6, I suggest you watch that video first, then come back to this video for the remaining 5 entries. Alright, with that being said, time to get this crazy train back a-rolling and on the tracks. Moving on next at number 5, we have Trevor Phillips from Grand Theft Auto 5. Yup, when you think about it, kinda knew that a Grand Theft Auto character would essentially show up on this list. Naturally, ask anyone who has played Grand Theft Auto Online, and they know they've come across at least one person who's crazy enough to cause unmitigated chaos throughout the game. That being said, Trevor Phillips is basically the embodiment of that insanity and chaos that Grand Theft Auto brings. And not just because of the fact that he's a dealer of illicit substances. Trevor Phillips is just flat out crazy to the point of basically having a hair-trigger temper that activates no matter what. Meaning, if you piss him off, you're gonna get the full dealt of his breath of his wrath. In fact, his entire rage gimmick, or his entire rampage gimmick, basically just involves him just doing more damage while taking less damage himself. And heck, he has an entire group of sub-stories where he goes on rampages against different people who tend to piss him off. And then that being said, even before the game, he's proven to be pretty crazy beforehand. And as when he was younger, he was growing up in Canada, he was essentially a part of his youth hockey team, only to get kicked out after basically sticking a hockey stick up his coat where the sun don't shine. And then there's, as well as being drummed out of the Royal Canadian Air Force because of his instability. And when it comes down to... But even with that, he's more or less a funny sort of hilarity in the game. And this is not actually even with his almost weirdly uncomfortable relationship with his mother, and the fact that he's one of the few characters that can wear a dress. Seriously, go to Binko, put him in a dress, you will laugh. I know I did. Moving on next at number 4, we have GLaDOS from the Portal series. Granted, I have never played either of the Portal games, but I'm planning to do so before Gabe Newell decides to release Portal 3. Which at this point, that's ever gonna happen. Either way, yeah, GLaDOS is a kind of interesting character. As from the beginning, he basically is one of the first characters you meet as she essentially puts together tests to test most of the cognitive faculties and the mental and physical fitness of the player character Kel, which naturally really does say a lot. With the threat of failure eventually resulting in Shell's death. That being said, things start off well, but things get a little iffy once the companion cube ends up getting introduced. And you eventually have to incinerate the companion cube, in which you discover that companion cube was a dampener set in place to prevent her from flooding the enrichment center with a deadly neurotoxin. And now that it's been turned to ash, she has no qualms with using that on Shell. Yeah. Granted, the only way she can be defeated is by removing the core personality cores to her to kind of more or less neuter her. But yeah, that's not the last we see of her, as she makes a return in Portal 2 as a overarching threat. Well, less so than the first game, but she eventually ends up getting put into a potato thanks to your current companion, Wheatley, who was created to be a bumbling idiot. Granted, that being said, we learned that GLaDOS wasn't all this as crazy as we thought her to be. And it turns out we learned that she used to be a woman by the name of Carolyn, the secretary of the president and founder of Aperture Science, Cave Johnson, who upon his death was forcefully against her will implanted into an AI her consciousness was forcefully implanted against her will into an AI robot. Yeah. Kinda nutty. And the fact that she killed the scientist who did so with deadly neurotoxin as revenge? Yeah. If you thought on our fears about AI in this current day and age were that bad, just be glad you're not living in the Portal universe. Moving on, next at number 3, we have Berkut from Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. Yeah. Alright, I know you're possibly getting tired of me putting a Fire Emblem character on these lists. But in certain aspects, many of these lists have had a Fire Emblem rep fitting in to that area. And this is no exception. Especially with recently, as many characters have shown up that have been considered insane. However, Berkut is one of the most notable, especially since when you first meet him, you don't know he's insane, as basically he seems like a suave, debonair member of Regalian nobility and a well-respected general of the Regalian army. And his cool demeanor definitely shows it. That being said, that is until he ends up facing off against Alm. And yeah, that facade ends up slipping very fast, as he faces off against Alm not once, but twice. Of course, things come to a head around part 5, around the end of part 4, beginning of part 5, where he ends up getting so butthurt after losing to Alm so many times that he ends up getting swayed to the altar where Duma is and sacrifices his fiancée Renea in order to become corrupted by Duma's immense power. And the reason why he does all this is because he thought he was going to be the next in line for the Regalian throne, only to discover that the true heir to the Regalian throne was Alm. What's the matter, Berkoop? No one told you life was gonna be this way? I didn't mean for the Friends reference. It kind of made sense. Moving on at number 2, we have Bolo from Pokemon Legends Arceus. Yeah. Pokemon. Speaking of franchises with no insane characters, Pokemon seems like it's one of those that really doesn't say the least. And while I could have essentially chosen someone like Cyrus or Getsis, they're not considered insane by most standards. And we wouldn't get that until Generation 8 with Volo, who, when you first are introduced to him, he seems like your standard traveling merchant. Of course, as it turns out, he's a bit knowledgeable about all the distortions that have been appearing in the sky around Hisui that cause your character to end up in Hisui in the first place, as well as the terrible fate that had befallen every one of the noble Pokemon. Turns out, Volo is a worshipper of Arceus, and he is not happy that you curried Arceus' favor. Not only is the guy wanting to become as powerful as the Pokemon god, he ends up partnering with Giratina, the Pokemon's representation of the devil, in order to do it. And he is flat out insane as a result, to the point that he does so because he wants to defeat Arceus in battle in order to become all-powerful. Yikes. At least he's gone for the most part. Oh no, I forgot. Of course, Pokemon Legends ZA had to ruin that. Of course. Finally, we have number 1. Kefka Palazzo from Final Fantasy VI. Yeah. Remember the motto that I meant? Remember the rule that I mentioned before? Or earlier on this list? Never trust a clown? Yeah, that rule was essentially created by Kefka Palazzo. And it's for Kefka Palazzo. And it shows, as this guy is flat out insane. Granted, throughout most of Final Fantasy VI, he's been behind many of the terrible things in the game. He's poisoned the water supply at Doma, he's destroyed the world, and he's become the nihilistic god of the New World in the second half of the game. Yeah. Honestly, he does all this with a smile on his face and a whimsical air. Even shows how crazy he is in Dissidia. He's like the Joker, but completely off his meds. Just completely, flat out insane. No other way to mention this, but Kafka definitely wins the #1 spot in mine and everyone else's books. Those are the top 10 most insane characters in video games. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.